There is a familiar roll call whenever people talk about the supermodel years of the 1990s. Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, Christy Turlington, Claudia Schiffer, sometimes Kate Moss. Those names became shorthand for a decade of runway fame, magazine covers, television campaigns, and beauty contracts that pushed models far beyond fashion. The shorthand works up to a point. It captures the women who became unavoidable. It also leaves out people whose careers matched the era at the highest level and yet never settled into public memory the same way. Veronica Webb belongs in that missing space.
You have the potential to get really big beauty contracts or big advertising contracts where you're going to be a millionaire by the time you're 30. You better immediately start thinking about what you want to do next.
She had the Revlon contract, the major runway work, the first Victoria's Secret show, the editorial credibility, and a voice that reached beyond the camera.
Very happy that Veronica is really back on top form, because there was a moment she thought she should go into movies and things like this, and her thing is fashion.
Her record is too large to treat as a footnote. Veronica Webb was born in Detroit, and her early life does not fit the usual fashion fairy tale. She did not grow up as a child model. She was not pushed toward the camera from the time she was young. The home she came from was shaped by education, discipline, and ambition. Her mother was among the first generation of commissioned Black female officers in the U.S. Army. Her sister became the first Black female oncologist in Michigan. In that household, breaking barriers was part of daily life, not a slogan. That background explains a great deal about the way Webb later moved through fashion. She came to New York on a scholarship to Parsons School of Design, where she studied animation. And that detail says a lot about where her mind was at the time. She was not arriving with the usual dream of being discovered and swept into magazines. She had come for school, for creative work, and for the kind of future that depended on training rather than fantasy. Modeling entered the picture later. To support herself, she worked retail in Soho, which in the early 1980s was full of artists, stylists, editors, downtown shoppers, and people moving between fashion and art all day long. It was the kind of place where careers could change in a single conversation, but it was also a place where ambition had to meet timing. Webb was working in a housewares boutique there when she was spotted. That part has often been repeated because fashion loves a discovery story. The stronger detail is that she was already in motion before anyone noticed her. She had already left Detroit, already won the scholarship, already placed herself in a world where talent and chance could meet. Once modeling began, it moved quickly. Within a short time, she had work. Within months, she was in Paris. That pace can make it sound as though everything happened effortlessly, but fast success in fashion can be its own test. It demands composure before a person has much time to develop it. Webb seems to have arrived with more of that than most. She had the kind of structure that let her absorb pressure, read a room, and keep going through rejection. Long hours and constant evaluation. A 1994 profile in The Independent described her as strict, articulate, and unusually thoughtful for a business that often preferred women to stay decorative and quiet. The article also connected that discipline to the household she came from. Webb did not come across as someone dazzled by the machinery of fashion. She came across as someone who could see the machinery clearly, step inside it, and still keep a measure of distance from it. That difference shaped everything. Even before the most famous milestone of her career, she was already treating fashion as work rather than fantasy. She knew how much access depended on timing, gatekeepers, and luck. She also knew those things were not distributed evenly, especially for Black models. That understanding would become central once she reached the level where she could force open doors instead of waiting for them. Webb's early rise took her to Paris, where she worked in the middle of an industry that still defined high fashion for the rest of the world. She spent much of the mid-1980s there, and that period gave her a level of runway credibility that later made it impossible to dismiss her as a model who only thrived in commercial work. The Victoria and Albert Museum describes her early career as including work with Azzedine Alaïa and Karl Lagerfeld before she moved back to New York. That is serious company for any model, especially one still early in her career. Paris also gave her entry into the magazine world that carried real influence at the time. Biographical sources and later accounts tie her to major editorial work, including European Vogue and Elle. By then, she was fully inside the business, learning its pace through fittings, castings, our runway calls, and the steady pressure that came with staying in demand. Still, the Paris years exposed a divide that went deeper than prestige. A black model could work for major designers in Europe and still run into a hard ceiling in the American advertising market. The runway and the beauty business did not operate by the same rules. A woman could walk for Lagerfeld and Alaya and still be told, directly or indirectly, that the biggest contracts were out of reach. Webb later spoke very clearly about those limits. Black models, she said, were made to understand that covers, cosmetics deals, and the kinds of jobs that created long-term financial security were often off the table. That is one reason her later Revlon contract carried so much weight. It was not only a glamorous booking, and it hit a part of the business where black women had been shut out. Cosmetics contracts were career infrastructure. They paid well, they ran in television and print, and they moved a model's face into places far beyond fashion magazines. They turned industry success into mainstream recognition. When Webb returned to New York, she brought Paris credibility with her, along with a clearer view of what the American market kept out of reach. She continued booking major shows and editorials while another side of her career started taking shape. She began writing with real intent, which gave her a place in fashion beyond the image. She was no longer moving through the industry only as its subject, but also as someone paying close attention to how it worked. That dual position made her unusual. It also made her harder to package. The industry is comfortable with beauty. It is less comfortable with beauty that talks back, analyzes the room, and keeps receipts. The most widely cited milestone in Veronica Webb's career came in 1992, when she secured a major cosmetics contract with Revlon for the Color Style line. Multiple reputable sources, including Allure, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and Revlon's own history, identify her as the first black model to land an exclusive or major long-term cosmetics contract with a major beauty company. That phrasing holds up across the strongest sources, and it is the safest way to state the achievement. The contract did not appear out of nowhere. Webb later explained that it came together through a very specific group of people. Bethan Hardison was her agent. Elizabeth Saltzman helped make the introduction. Jerry Backus Glover, a black cosmetic chemist at Revlon, was developing Color Style as a line formulated for black women. Webb called the deal the perfect confluence of events, which is a precise way to describe it. It was talent meeting timing, but it was also advocacy meeting product development when a company finally decided to act. The V&A includes a dated 1992 Color Style advertisement featuring Webb, placing the claim in a clear historical frame. Revlon's own history supports it too, identifying her as the first African-American model to land an exclusive contract with a major beauty brand when she joined the Color Style launch. With both records pointing to the same milestone, the achievement stands on firm ground. The contract brought money and visibility, but it also changed something more concrete. Cosmetics advertising reached beyond the fashion audience. Runway work could build prestige. Editorials could build credibility. A beauty campaign could put a model's face in drugstores, department stores, television spots, and everyday conversations. It entered a part of public life that people encountered while shopping, not just while reading magazines. That difference helps explain why the Revlon deal carried so much force. Webb later wrote that women told her they used those ads to push local drugstores into carrying shades for black customers. That is one of the most useful details in the whole story because it moves the milestone out of abstract language and into ordinary life. Her image in the campaign did not simply signal beauty industry progress in theory. It affected what some women were able to find on shelves. It gave customers something visible to point to. The campaign did not solve the problem on its own, but it made it harder for stores to pretend the demand was not there. The contract also changed what Webb could press for once she had that degree of visibility. She pushed for black hairdressers, makeup artists, assistants, and other workers on set. She later described that effort as part of her legacy. That point is easy to miss if the Revlon deal is treated only as a glamorous first. Webb did not use the breakthrough only to secure her own place. She used it to widen the room around her. In an industry that often liked symbolic progress more than structural change, That was a serious use of leverage. It also says something about how clearly she understood the limits of being the exception. One black woman in the ad did not change who held authority behind the camera, who got hired regularly, or who benefited from the money flowing through the production. Webb seemed to grasp that immediately. Visibility alone was never the whole prize. Access, hiring, and presence inside the working structure mattered too. That is what gives the Revlon contract its lasting weight. It raised her profile, of course. It also gave her room to act in side spaces that had long kept black talent at the edges, especially behind the scenes. She used that room with purpose. Veronica Webb was never some nearly there figure standing just outside the center of 1990s fashion. She worked at the level that defined it. The jobs she booked, the names attached to her resume, and the visibility she carried all place her in the top tier of the era. She belonged in the real picture, not as a side note tucked just beyond it. She worked with Chanel. She worked with Karl Lagerfeld. She worked with Azzedine Alaïa. She walked major runways in New York and Paris. She appeared in major editorial spreads. In 1994, New York Magazine named her Model of the Year. That title says plenty about how established she was at the time. People inside fashion knew exactly where she stood. Her mainstream visibility can be tied to a single event. Getty Images and Harper's Bazaar both place her in the first Victoria's Secret fashion show at the Plaza Hotel in New York on August 1, 1995. Harper's Bazaar also includes Webb's own recollections of that first show and the way models of her era viewed that kind of exposure. She knew what those jobs could do. A cosmetics contract and a Victoria's Secret runway were major signals that a model had entered the wider culture. Calling Veronica Webb overlooked takes a little care. She was visible during her peak, and people in fashion knew exactly who she was. The stronger point is that later retellings of the supermodel era have mentioned her less often than a career of that scale would suggest. She booked the campaigns, crossed into the mass market, and earned a place among the decade's major figures. And even if later shorthand kept narrowing the field, what stands out now is the gap between what she achieved and how rarely her name is placed beside the era's most repeated icons. Her 1990s record is clear. The smaller memory that followed says less about her standing than it does about which names kept getting carried forward. Long before people started treating Veronica Webb as a writer, she was already doing the work. Reference sources show that she became a contributing editor and columnist at Paper in 1989 and a contributing editor at Interview in 1990. A 1994 profile described her as writing monthly columns for Interview and American LA while still working as a major model. By then, writing had already become a second career, running alongside the first. Her resume begins to look different at this point. Fashion had little trouble turning models into symbols. It had far less room for women who insisted on having language, opinions, and bylines of their own. Webb appeared in magazines while also helping shape what went into them. That gave her a public identity that resisted being reduced to one image. A later commentary on Webb often returns to her intelligence as one of her defining qualities. A 2024 profile described her as someone who led with her mind as much as her face. That description helps explain why the standard supermodel mythology does not always know where to place her. She did not move through the industry in silence. Her writing life also connected her to a broader media world. Reference material identifies her as a correspondent for Good Morning America and HBO entertainment programming. Those credits widened her reach beyond fashion, but they also exposed her to a different kind of scrutiny. A model moving into journalism had to prove herself twice. Fashion could dismiss the writing as a side activity. Traditional media could treat the model label as disqualifying. Webb spent years working inside that tension, and that tension helps explain why her record stands apart. Most people remembered from the supermodel era are remembered through one lane. Webb kept moving across them. She was on the runway, in print as a writer, and on television speaking to an audience that had no investment in the hierarchy of the front row. Her career kept widening as she moved. Later, pop memory had a harder time reducing her to one clean brand. That helps explain why her name is easier to narrow than the scale of the work she actually produced. Webb's career also runs alongside a larger push by Black women in fashion to stop treating representation as charity. Bethan Hardison's official biography places Webb among the early discoveries around her agency work and also links her to the Black Girls Coalition, the group Hardison co-founded with Iman. The coalition began as a way to celebrate the number of Black models working at the time. It became something sharper once the industry made clear how quickly that visibility could shrink. That backdrop puts Webb's success in sharper focus. She was working in a field where gatekeepers could still signal exclusion openly. Hardison later recalled casting language that spelled it out in plain terms. No Blacks, no ethnics. Fashion was often blunt about it. The message did not need decoding. Now, Webb's presence in that climate makes her career easier to understand. She did not emerge as some isolated breakthrough floating above the politics of the industry. She belonged to a generation of Black models, agents, and advocates who understood that visibility could vanish as fast as it arrived. The campaigns, the runway bookings, the magazine pages, all of it existed inside a system that could celebrate one Black woman in one season and shut the door again the next. That is why Webb's use of leverage on sets stands out. It became a practical response to an old pattern. Her later comments about mentorship and allyship fit neatly into that history. They do not sound like slogans pasted on after the fact. They sound like the habits of someone who knew exactly how fragile access could be if nobody fought to widen it. That helps explain something else about Veronica Webb's legacy. Her name does not always rise as quickly as some of her peers when people look back on the 1990s. She never settled into one version of herself long enough for the culture to package her neatly. She could give fashion the image it wanted, then step outside that frame and show something sharper, more curious, and harder to contain. One day, she was fronting a beauty campaign. Another day, she was writing, interviewing, and speaking in her own voice. Public memory tends to cling to what is easiest to label. It favors the face, the campaign, the image people can recall in a second. Webb gave the era that image, but she also kept moving beyond it. Over time, one breakthrough came to stand in for everything else. The name stayed familiar, yet the full scale of the career began to fade behind the shorthand. By the time people started looking back on that era as a finished chapter, the simplified version had already taken hold. What remained in circulation was only part of the picture. The rest of it sat in plain sight, spread across film, television, publishing, and journalism. That wider record can be traced without much difficulty because it sits in several different corners of public culture. Veronica Webb's work outside modeling was visible, documented, and broad enough to stand on its own. She appeared in Spike Lee's Jungle Fever in 1991 and Malcolm X in 1992. Rotten Tomatoes and other film databases preserve those cast listings, while Cannes materials place her around the promotional life of Jungle Fever during its festival run. These were not random brushstrokes added to a famous face. They placed her near major cultural work at a time when film, music, fashion, and celebrity press were constantly feeding into one another. That matters because the early 1990s were full of models trying to extend themselves into other fields. But not all of those efforts landed with the same credibility. Webb's film work connected her to a director whose projects were being discussed as more than entertainment. Spike Lee's films were public arguments as much as they were movies, and appearing in that orbit gave Webb a different kind of cultural proximity than a routine cameo would have. It located her near a world where image, politics, media, and art were all colliding. Television opened another lane. Tim Gunn's Guide to Style brought Webb to Bravo as Tim Gunn's co-host in its first season. Production material and television references confirmed the role. By then, she was no longer moving through public life as someone known only for photographs or runway appearances. She could hold a screen, carry a conversation, and meet viewers in a format that depended less on image alone and more on timing, presence, and personality. Television asks a different kind of control from modeling. Webb had it. Then there is the book. Veronica Webb, Sight, Adventures in the Big City was published in 1998 by Miramax Books and Hyperion. Library and archive records confirm the publication details. Contemporary reviews treated it as an essay collection by someone already established in fashion, media, and print. That is the key part. By the time the book arrived, she was not testing out a new identity in public. She already had one that stretched across several forms. Taken together, the film credits, the hosting work, and the book make something plain. Her career kept moving outward. The public memory often stayed fixed on the breakthrough, while the actual record kept widening. Veronica Webb's 1995 interview profile of Mary J. Blige became one of the most remembered celebrity magazine confrontations of that period. It stayed in circulation for years and kept resurfacing in later profiles and press coverage. A 1999 New York magazine profile said Blige nearly got into a fistfight with Webb. A 2002 Guardian profile described Webb as the interviewer Blige asked outside for a fight and said the fallout led Blige's label to send her to etiquette training. What might have been a routine magazine feature turned into a public flashpoint. By then, Webb was already established as a writer at Interview. The assignment placed her across from one of the biggest singers in the country, and the piece became attached to both of their public histories. Years later, that Webb said the article brought praise and criticism in equal measure. The episode marked something larger in her career. She had moved beyond being photographed, styled, or cast. She was now asking the questions, shaping the piece, and absorbing the fallout when the exchange went sideways. By now, Veronica Webb's place in the 1990s is clear. The real question is why her name does not come up as quickly as others from the same era. Part of the answer is in how that decade has been remembered. The supermodel years are often reduced to a short list of faces that became easiest to preserve in public memory. Webb belonged in that world, but her career never fit neatly into one image. She had the runway credibility, the Revlon contract, the editorial presence, the television work, the writing, and the influence behind the scenes. That kind of career is harder to compress into one familiar headline. There is also a pattern in fashion itself. The industry knows how to celebrate a first. It is far less consistent when it comes to carrying that change forward. Webb's Revlon contract marked a major breakthrough. But one breakthrough did not remake the wider structure. She knew that, and she used her position to push for Black talent behind the scenes instead of settling for symbolic progress. That is part of why her legacy feels larger than the shorthand that followed. The barrier-breaking milestone stayed in view, while the rest of the career was mentioned less and less. Over time, the public memory shrank around one achievement, even though her actual body of work kept stretching far beyond it. Veronica Webb's career does not need rescuing. It needs to be seen in full. She came from Detroit to New York on a Parsons scholarship. She built an early career in Paris with designers tied to the center of high fashion. In 1992, she landed a historic Revlon contract for color style and became the first Black model widely credited with securing a major exclusive cosmetics deal with a major beauty company. She used that position to push for Black talent behind the scenes. She wrote for Paper and Interview. She worked in film. She hosted television. She walked in the first Victoria's Secret show. New York Magazine named her Model of the Year. That is a major career by any standard. It belongs to someone who moved across fashion, media, and culture with unusual range and presence. Veronica Webb did not disappear because the work was small. And she slipped from the shorthand because the shorthand was smaller than the life. Once the full picture comes into view, the omission stops looking accidental. Leaving her out does not just diminish one woman, it narrows the decade itself.